The Cubs YouTube channel The Setup Man scored an interview with ESPN baseball reporter Jesse Rogers. Jesse recently wrote an article about the Cubs and their financial situation, and this interview was mainly about asking questions in regards to that. Much of the information Jesse provided in this interview frankly made me mad. In this video, I want to react to the comments Jesse made, but let me be clear that I am not being critical of Jesse here. He is simply relaying information to us. He is not a representative of the Cubs. My critiques are towards the Cubs and the Ricketts family who own the team. Let's begin.
There's a lot of things, especially from your article, that we're going to break down. But I think the number one question I have for you is, you had a quote from Jed Hoyer earlier in the offseason of just like, hey, Juan Soto is just a guy that we just decided that we weren't going to go after. And it kind of felt that way on the biggest guys in the free agent market, from Juan Soto to Corbin Burnes to Max Fried. Do you just have any sort of insight to the simple question of why not?
Well, I think it goes back to things in my article that I feel like in this decade, they're running it a little different than last decade, at least in the moment here, in the present time. Maybe that changes when there is a new collective bargaining agreement. And for people that don't know, every sport has an agreement between the players and the owners, exactly how the economics of the sport are going to be run, how much of the pie players are going to get from the revenues that come in. So I think a lot of baseball fans understand that obviously there's that to deal with. And every 4 or 5 years, they have to come up with a new agreement between the owners and the players about the economics. So there's another battle, so to speak, or negotiation coming up in 2026. And so I think a lot of people, I called it industry observers. Those would include agents who talk to the Cubs a lot, feel like the Cubs are going to wait until the next collective bargaining agreement is negotiated before they really dip back into the deep end of the free agent pool.
Okay, on this point right here, let's be absolutely clear that the Cubs never played in the deep end of the free agent pool, at least compared to what other teams were doing. The deep end of the pool for the Cubs were the Jason Hayward and Dansby Swanson deals, which really aren't that crazy. The Ricketts family simply will not spend big on any one player. We heard at the beginning of this offseason that they would not be going after the biggest free agents like Juan Soto, Max Fried, and Corbin Burnes, and I'm actually surprised that they admitted this, but they've never gone after those types of players that can command the biggest deals. In the offseason of the 4 shortstops, Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts, Carlos Correa, and Dansby Swanson, they signed the cheapest one, which has turned out to be a bad mistake. This is the Cubs' version of playing in the deep end of the free agent pool, and they will only do one of those at a time, which I have been saying ad nauseum.
Why have things changed? Well, I think a decade ago, as we were just talking, the sport was a little different in terms of spending on players and payrolls and things. It skyrocketed with, I think, sort of the new age billionaires that have come of age in this country, to be honest, and now are owning teams. Many more billionaires than there were just a decade ago and a decade before that. And a lot of them are owning teams as hobbies, not as their primary business. So there's a lot of things at work here. Steve Cohen clearly is not owning the Mets as his primary business where he draws an income.
He mentions that Steve Cohen is not running the Mets as a business from which he derives an income, and to that end, neither should the Ricketts family with the Cubs, but they seem to be doing that. Tom Ricketts is the founder and current chairman of In Capital LLC, a financial services firm. Pete Ricketts is currently a United States Senator from Nebraska. Todd Ricketts has many things he currently does, which include being on the board of TD Ameritrade and World Bicycle Relief, being a board member and CEO of a small government advocacy group called Ending Spending Inc., a co-founder of the alternative search engine FreeSpoke, and being the finance chairman for the Republican National Committee. And finally, Laura Ricketts is a former lawyer who also happens to own the female soccer team, the Chicago Red Stars, while also being a board member of Lambda Legal and the Housing Opportunities for Women organization. All four of these siblings are doing other things from which they should be deriving an income for themselves. None of them are hurting for money. Therefore, Jesse's point about Cohen not using the Mets for income, thus implying that the Ricketts family are using the Cubs for income, is pissing me off if that's the case.
Well, you've already alluded to it, and I'm going to throw this up on the screen here, but this is the main thing that I took away when reading your article, and I'm going to read it out for everyone. The addition of a new television network in 2020 hasn't been the main cash cow that the team thought it would be, according to a source familiar to the situation. Meanwhile, private equity investment has ownership, answering questions to more than just a handful of local minority investors like it did previously. The bottom line is more of a concern than ever, with some industry observers believing the Cubs won't sign a mega deal for players for the next labor agreement before the next labor agreement is negotiated with the players after the 2026 season. So I have three main questions about that. Number one is Marquee. And just, I know with all the TV stuff going on around the league, can you help shed some light to fans of just how important TV deals are in the P&Ls for these businesses and for these organizations?
Yeah, for people that don't know, this is why the Dodgers can spend as much as they want. They have the best local television deal of any team in baseball, and they signed it right before the cord cutting era began. And I can't remember the exact years, but mid last decade, they signed like billions and billions of dollars in terms of their television thing that lasts like 25 years. And then the cord cutting started, and cord cutting, people are just getting rid of cable.
Right.
And that hurts the right, the money that goes into the rights fees. So the Cubs, meanwhile, their television deal was up at the worst time, right when cord cutting began. And then the pandemic hit. And at the same time, they decided to start their own station, where, again, is impacted by cord cutting, is impacted by the pandemic, is impacted by rebuilding. All that hit them right around 2020 when Marquee went on the air, and I don't think they've been able to completely recover.
Now we get to the part where he talks about the Marquee network and it not generating the type of revenue the Cubs expected. The Cubs had a choice to make back during this period of either starting their own network or signing a TV deal with an existing network to broadcast games. They chose to start Marquee, and now we're hearing that it's not panning out financially. Then that's totally their fault. They made a bad business decision, so they're using that as an excuse for not spending more money. They could have sold the broadcast rights to an existing network and just collected money, for which they would not have needed to spend any money to run. Now, I am not saying they could have gotten as much money as the Dodgers did, but I'm sure they would have netted themselves a handsome chunk of change for selling the broadcast rights. Starting Marquee was a bad business decision, but the team should not need to suffer because of the owner's poor business acumen. It's true that the COVID pandemic happened right when Marquee was launched, and they could not have seen that coming, but the impact from that was maybe 2 years at the most. The past couple of years, there has been no more impact from COVID, but it sounds like the Ricketts are still using that as an excuse. Take personal responsibility for your poor business choices.
Going back to my last answer, it happened right around 2020, right?
Okay.
So I think that, remember what the quote he gave me during the pandemic, biblical losses. I think it's all those things I mentioned before. This is them talking, and this is the big disconnect between fans and owners. Fans think that they're printing money daily.
Sure.
Owners say, no, it's a valuation business. Yes, we're going to make a ton of money when we sell the team. The comparison that was made to me, the most simplest one is when you buy a Picasso, assuming you insure it, which you should, you are losing money every year on that Picasso because you're paying a big insurance premium. But when you sell the Picasso, you make it all back and then some. That's the way the Cubs and many of these owners will tell you about baseball. Baseball is not a cash profitable business year to year, especially the baseball operations part. And that's the disconnect.
And now we're back to the famous Ricketts quote from 2020 about the biblical losses the Cubs were suffering due to the pandemic. And it sounds like this is when the family decided to sell minority stakes in the team to get a cash infusion. And now they are beholden to these minority investors to produce profits, which is another factor in them not spending enough. So I'll go back to them being poor businessmen. Buying a professional sports franchise has always been a good business decision because a team's value always appreciates. However, when one is looking at making a purchase of a sports franchise, they should be doing their due diligence to ensure they will be financially capable of running the team properly. If you are unable to properly finance a team, then don't buy one. But what Jesse is saying here is that this is a recent phenomenon, much of it due to the financial hardship stemming from the pandemic. But that did not seem to affect the Dodgers any. The Cubs play in the third largest market in the country, and last year they earned the third most revenue in baseball. More than everyone except the Dodgers and Yankees, even more than the Mets. If they're still unable to financially care for the team while earning all this money, they need to seriously consider selling the team to someone that can. They would make a tidy profit from the sale. Anyone that wants to own a team should always be doing it for the right reasons, which is to be a good steward of the franchise by doing all you can to win. An owner has a civic responsibility to the fans and the city, especially since most of them take public money. Unfortunately, this is not the way things are for the majority of teams. Most of the owners buy them simply to extract profits. They don't care much about winning, just about making money. If not originally their plan, the Ricketts seem to be operating the Cubs this way now, and it's just flat out wrong. Again, the owners should not need to look at the team as their personal cash cow. All four of the siblings, as I pointed out, are doing other things in which they derive income from. If they simply want more money for personal use and are using the Cubs' revenue for this purpose, which I don't know for sure, then they deserve every bit of scorn I can throw at them. We can all see plain as day how much revenue this team earns. The Ricketts are claiming this revenue is not enough to spend like the Yankees, Dodgers, and Mets, but I believe it is, and they simply don't want to. The Ricketts, despite starting off strongly as owners of the Cubs, are now floundering, and it's time for them to look at selling the team to someone that can run it the way it deserves to be run. Of course, I know they're not going to do this, but they absolutely should, because they are turning into the laughingstock of baseball.